You say hi, everybody. Say hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
We're building a lathe today.
We've been in life today.
So yesterday I built this little workbench complete with a vise, and I modified the vise a little bit. I'll talk about that later in today's video, but I'm kind of focusing on things today and maybe even tomorrow that I can create more tools with. And a pump lathe is really easy to make. You don't need a whole lot to make it, and it would be very handy for making more tools like mallets and handles and all kinds of fun stuff. So let's get to it. So just a quick fair warning, today's voiceover is a little guerrilla style action going on. I'm on the back porch, it's pouring rain, there's crickets going, and I believe I hear a drum off in the distance, but I'll do the best I can to keep that down to a minimum. This build is really quite straightforward. The bench I built yesterday, I wanted to add a pump lathe to it. My thought was, you know, if I was in a situation where I didn't have power or I didn't have access to, grid power, I could still use my cordless tools because I could charge solar or I could charge with a generator. But pretty much everything else I'd want to do by hand, and that's how I'm building this project today. I started by mounting a 7-foot piece of 2x4 to the backside of my bench with a little T on top of it. And then for cuts that I need to make real accurately, like the one I'm doing right now, I mark it out with a knife and then cut away a little bit of the material with the chisel so I have a nice solid back to set my saw up against, and I'm able to get some pretty accurate cuts just with the handsaw that way. Now I'm building out a little bit from the back of the bench, and that's what that 2x4 is. It's just a spacer, and then that long 2x4 I screwed to that spacer, and that's going to leave a 1.5 inch gap between the back of the bench and that 2x4 on the face. Then I came back and cleaned all the sharp edges up with a chisel, or in this case I am using a hand plane. This thing came in very handy throughout this whole build. So this whole build is just going to be done with hand tools and the drill. That's the goal of this build, and it took a lot longer to do than I anticipated it to. But it was worth it. It was a lot of fun. So right now what you saw there is me working on the two towers, the headstock and the tailstock. Now in this case they're reversed. I'm going to have the headstock, or the stock that's going to power the side that's going to power the turning action on the right, and I'm going to have the movable side on the left. I hope that makes sense. So there was a lot of hand cutting today, and a lot of fun, a lot of plane work, and a lot of an audience. It was kind of fun. I moved everything up underneath the porch roof because we were expecting rain. So now anytime I was going to have this sharp corner exposed, I went through with the chisel or the plane there and just softened it. Now right now what I'm working on is the tailstock, and this will make sense here in a second. And that goes through that little gap between the 2x4 and the bench, and I want it to be pretty stiff, so I have to move it back and forth with a hammer, and that's going to be, essentially it's going to be the tailstock. So after I'd had that one side done, I put a piece of 2x4 behind that, and not real tight up against the bottom of the bench, but just firmly held it in place and added some screws. Now, I want this to be pretty beefy because I'm going to be putting some serious pressures on it, so I added a second piece or a second plate to the other side of the tailstock that rides along that 2x4, and that made it actually pretty sturdy. Now, once I get it into place and want to lock it down, I'm just using some wedges. So once I move it to where I want it, I can use that little wedge system and lock it right down. For the metal pieces that I'm using to turn the stock on, I'm just using some nails. These are some big spikes that my wife picked up from Home Depot this morning. Just hacksawed them off and then stuck them in the drill, and you'll see here in a second how I made them to sharpen them down rather. So after I had the first one in, I moved the tailstock up against the headstock to kind of mark the second position, and then I held my drill, the back of my drill, as close as I could to center when I drilled the second hole, and that kind of hopefully made them close to coming together. It's not real important on a pump lathe as it would be on something that is powered by a drill or another device. So to make that metal piece, I just cut it off with a hacksaw and then stuck it in the drill chuck and used a file to sharpen it to a point. Now I was a little bit concerned about them being too sharp because I was worried about it eating into the material, but it ended up being okay. So with the headstock and tailstock made, I started making this makeshift tool rest, and I used the hand plane to get down to a narrow, I don't want a whole 1.5 inches along the top. I want it kind of narrow and a little bit rounded over so I can rock the tool back and forth to get a better cut. So I use the hand plane on the edge of a piece of 2x4 to kind of narrow it up. Unfortunately, I did not get a good shot of the tool rest till later in this video, but it'll all make sense here in a minute. And you can kind of see that tower in the background behind the two drills. It's amazing how much work you can get done with a sharp hand plane, and this is just a little block plane. So with all that stuff done, I needed to install the foot pump. I don't even know what to call this thing. This is what I'm going to attach some paracord to, and then it's going to wrap around the piece of material I want to turn, and above you there's a bungee cord, and I did not get a very good shot of that. I'm sorry I didn't. I should have done a better job. You're just going to have to trust me on that. There's a bungee cord hanging from that 2x4. So when you're wrapping the cord, you want to make sure that the cord coming from the foot pedal is over the top, and the cord going to the bungee cord comes up from the backside and goes up. That way when you're stepping down, which has the most power, is when you're making the cut. So you want it turning towards you when you're stepping down. That's it. That's what I'm trying to say. Now I got to be honest, this is the first pump lathe I've ever made, and I was really surprised at how effective they are. Now I will tell you, the guys that do this kind of stuff day in and day out, mad respect for you. I think it took me about 10 minutes to turn this very wet sapling down to a handle shape, maybe a little more than that, and my butt was really sore after doing that. So I'm using some lathe tools that I got off of Amazon, and now these are just the carbide scraper type of tools. They're not cutting tools, so they didn't perform really well in this really wet. I mean, literally I went out in the woods, cut this sapling down, and I'm turning it 5 minutes later, so it's really soaking wet. And the scraper type of tools didn't do real well on this. I needed to invest in some like cutter style tools. But again, for what it was working great. And if I was ever in an emergency situation, I'd make a bench and then I would make a lathe, because the lathe you can build mallets with, you can make handles with it, you can make dowels with it for construction and doing all kinds of stuff. And ultimately, this worked a lot better than I anticipated it working. So it was definitely worthwhile and a fun project while we're waiting for Hurricane Matthews to go. Thanks for watching.